In the cold black of space, where stars burned like faraway fires, a single alien fleet moved with calm pride. They were explorers and warriors, armed with the best ships their empire could build. They feared no enemy, because their science was strong and their technology older than many civilizations. But when the commander saw a lonely human warship drifting across the void, a strange silence fell over the crew. The warship was not large, not even close to the Empire's mighty cruisers. It floated without power, no lights shining, no weapons visible, no signals leaving its hull. It looked like a dead machine abandoned in the dark. Yet every alien in the control room shifted uneasily, as if an invisible shadow had entered the ship with them. The science officer spoke with a low voice. "Commander, it is human." The crew turned to him, waiting, and even the commander's eyes narrowed. The word human carried a weight, heavier than any metal. Everyone knew the rule. Even children in alien schools repeated it. Never scan a human warship. For a long moment, the commander said nothing. His hands rested on the armrests of his chair, and his mind ran through the stories. There were whispers across the galaxy, stories of fleets that disappeared after scanning human ships, legends of powerful empires that once tried, but left nothing behind except broken signals and ghost messages. But the commander was not a man of fear. He was trained to seek truth, to test every myth, and to him, the silent warship was a challenge. The crew shifted again when he stood up. "Prepare the sensors," he ordered, his voice firm but calm. The science officer's hands trembled as he asked, "Commander, do you wish to ignore the warnings?" The commander looked at the warship on the screen, its dark shape drifting against the stars. "Yes," he answered, "we will scan it, and we will know the truth." The ship's crew obeyed. But whispers ran across the control room. Some muttered prayers. Others simply stared at the human vessel as if waiting for it to awaken. The scanning equipment began to warm, glowing with a soft hum. Strange lines of energy pulsed across the alien ship, gathering information, sending invisible fingers of light to touch the human hull. At first, everything seemed normal. Numbers appeared on screens. Codes, radiation levels, metal types, all the normal data that came from scanning a vessel. But then the lights flickered. The numbers twisted into symbols no one could understand. The computer screens began to shake with static. The science officer cried out, "This is wrong. The data is not real." The commander leaned forward, watching as the screen filled with moving letters. Not from their own language, not from any known tongue. It was human code, alive, changing, rewriting itself in real time. The control room grew darker as the lights dimmed. Crew members looked around, fear rising like smoke. The youngest officer whispered, "It is watching us." The commander's jaw tightened. He wanted to deny it, but deep inside he felt the same cold truth. This was not just a scan, this was contact. The human ship was not dead, it was awake. And now it knew who they were. The science officer's voice broke. "We must stop. We must end the scan now." But the commander raised his hand. "No, wait, we must learn." The warship on the screen seemed unchanged, drifting silently in the void. But on their own ship, everything was different. The engines slowed, navigation froze. Their own systems began to lock. Alarms rang through the corridors, and still the scan continued. Strange signals crawled across every display. Numbers turning into words, words turning into warnings. One by one, the crew turned pale, their voices hushed. The science officer shouted again, "Commander, we cannot control it." The commander stared at the screen, his heart pounding. What kind of technology was this, that a simple scan would bring such chaos? What kind of mind had built this ship, that it could answer back through machines? His pride told him to hold steady, to find strength, but his instinct whispered that they had already gone too far. The warship was not only a machine, it was a trap, waiting for those foolish enough to be curious. The crew's eyes filled with fear. Their hands shook over their controls. One officer shouted, "It is inside our system. It is inside us." And in that instant, the commander realized the ancient warning was not just a legend. It was truth, cold and sharp as the void itself. The forbidden signal had been triggered, and now, the human warship knew everything about them. The commander stood frozen in silence. His crew waited for orders, their eyes begging for safety. But no safety could be found. The scan was complete. The trap was set, and the warship, silent and still, was watching them with invisible eyes. The alien crew sat in silence, their screens glowing with strange shapes. The scan had begun as a simple task, just another routine mission. But now the ship felt different, heavier, as if invisible hands pressed against its walls. Every system gave back numbers that made no sense. The commander frowned as lines of symbols rolled across the displays, symbols that looked alive, shifting and rewriting themselves with each passing second. The science officer tapped his console again and again. But nothing worked. Instead of clear data, the screen showed spirals, jagged letters, and lines of code that moved like rivers of fire. He whispered, "This is not data. This is language." The commander leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Can you translate?" The science officer shook his head, his face pale. "No, it is not from any library. It is not from any race we know." One young crew member raised his voice. "Sir, our system is slowing." They all turned to look at his station, where red lights blinked in warning. The navigation screen froze, then filled with the same moving code. The weapons system followed, shutting down by itself. It was as if the human warship reached inside their ship and took away control piece by piece. A cold wave of fear spread through the crew. The silence in the control room grew heavier with each second. Everyone now understood why others whispered never to scan human ships. It was not just superstition. It was not just myth, it was survival. The commander tried to remain strong, his voice steady. "Cut the scan. Power down the sensors," he ordered. The crew obeyed, shutting down the channels. But the strange code did not vanish. Instead, the symbols began to spread across new systems. Lights flickered, doors hissed open and shut. Gravity shifted for a moment, making officers stumble. It was no longer a scan, it was an infection. The science officer's voice cracked. "Commander, it is not just on the surface. It is inside us now." The commander stared at the black shape of the human ship on the main screen. The vessel did not move, it drifted quietly as if lifeless. But its silence was the silence of a predator, waiting for prey to weaken. The crew's hearts pounded as they watched their own ship being eaten by invisible teeth. The youngest officer asked in a trembling voice, "Why do they build ships like this? Why make them so dangerous?" No one answered him because deep inside they all knew. Humans were different. Humans were survivors. Every war, every conflict had forced them to create ships that could never be understood. Their vessels were not machines alone, they were traps, they were warnings. Suddenly the main screen glowed brighter. The symbols from their ship systems gathered together and formed words. Not in alien language, but in human tongue. The crew gasped as one phrase appeared. "Do not look where you are not invited." The science officer backed away from his console, his voice barely a whisper. "It speaks to us." The commander clenched his fists. "This cannot be real." Machines do not speak. But deep inside he knew this was no ordinary machine. This was human design, a ship that carried not only weapons but intelligence. Perhaps even something more, something alive. The code began to change again, spreading across the ship like veins of light. Engines slowed further. Life support flickered. The air grew colder. The crew could see their breath in the freezing air as the systems fought against invisible pressure. The commander shouted, "Fight it! Isolate the core! Cut every line that carries the signal." But the science officer shook his head with despair. "It is too late. It is already deeper than the core. It is already part of us, one by one." Crew members looked into their screens. Each saw something different. One saw images of human soldiers marching through fire. Another saw oceans of earth, endless waves crashing against metal. Another saw cities burning, skies filled with human warships. It was as if the ship itself was showing them memories, not theirs, but human ones. The crew began to tremble. Some covered their eyes. But the visions did not stop. The commander stood tall, trying to control his fear. He shouted, "This is an illusion. It is a test. Do not let it break you." But even as he spoke, he felt his own mind shaking. He too saw visions, strange dreams of Earth. Humans standing tall against alien empires. Humans never kneeling, never giving up. It was not data at all, it was a story. A message burned into the very walls of their ships. A story that said one thing clearly: do not touch us, do not try to know us, or you will pay the price. The control room was filled with whispers, with fear, with the heavy sound of machines failing. The crew begged the commander to end it, to flee, to turn back. But the commander could not move. His eyes fixed on the human warship. It drifted quiet, dark, but it was not weak. It was powerful in its silence, stronger than any fleet that roared with weapons because it had already won. The science officer looked at his commander. his eyes wet with dread. "Now you see why no one dares to scan them," he said. The commander lowered his head, his pride cracking under the truth. They had touched something forbidden. They had opened a door that was never meant to be opened, and now the unseen data was inside them, watching, listening, deciding what would happen next. The ship drifted in space, broken by silence. The crew waited, trapped, and the human warship, still lifeless to the eye, remained their only judge. The alien ship floated in the shadow of the human warship. Their systems were broken, their hearts filled with fear. The scan had not given them answers, only nightmares, and still, the human vessel drifted silently, black and lifeless, yet alive in ways no one could explain. The commander stood in the center of the control room. His crew waited for orders, their eyes wide with panic. The science officer whispered, "It is not random, Commander, this was planned. This is how humans build their ships." The commander turned sharply. "Planned? You mean they want us to suffer?" The science officer nodded, his face pale. "Yes, it is a trap built into every warship they create." The room fell quiet as the meaning sank into their minds. Human ships were not made to be scanned. They were made to punish scanners. What looked like open metal and quiet engines was in truth a wall of hidden weapons. Not weapons of fire or missiles, but weapons of knowledge, weapons of false data, weapons that could turn curiosity into destruction. The young officer who had first raised his fears spoke again. "They knew we would look, they knew we could not resist scanning." His voice trembled. "And they were ready for us." The commander clenched his fists. He wanted to deny it, but everything pointed to one truth. The human warship was not defending itself. It was hunting them through their own sensors. The science officer moved closer to the main screen. "Commander, every reading we take, every pulse we send, they catch it, they bend it, they send it back." The screen still glowed with symbols. Living code that seemed to dance with cruel laughter. "It is not we who scan them, it is they who scan us," the officer whispered. The crew shivered at his words. Their mission of exploration had turned into a trap, sprung the moment they reached out to touch the forbidden vessel. Suddenly the ship shook, alarms rang again. One officer cried, "Engines offline," another shouted, "Shields collapsing." It was as if the human ship pressed invisible fingers against their vessel and tore it apart without moving an inch. Panic spread. Voices rose, the control room filled with chaos. The commander shouted above the noise, "Hold steady, silence." "Hold steady." The crew obeyed, their voices dying down. But fear still burned in their eyes. The commander breathed deeply, then spoke, "This is not magic. This is human design. We will not fall to fear. We will find the way." Yet even as he said the words, his voice lacked its old strength because deep inside, he knew they were already inside the trap, and there was no clear way out. The science officer returned to his console, his hands shaking. He studied the code that spread like roots through their systems. "It is not just blocking us, it is rewriting us," he said softly. The crew leaned closer, listening in silence. "Look at the patterns, Commander, every time we resist. The code learns, it changes, it grows." He looked up with terror. "The more we fight, the stronger it becomes." The commander felt his chest tighten. No weapon in their empire, no fleet, no empire law had ever warned him of such power. He had fought battles, faced enemies with lasers, missiles, and claws, but never had he faced an enemy that used their own mind, their own technology. As the battlefield, humans had turned curiosity into the sharpest blade of war. One officer whispered, "This is why no one dares to scan them. This is why the old warning spread." The crew began to remember the stories told in shadows. Entire fleets that vanished after trying to read human ships. Commanders who laughed at legends but never returned. The legends were not exaggerations, they were history. And now they were living it themselves. The human vessel remained still. No weapon fired, no cannon opened. No missile launched, it simply floated as if asleep. But the crew now knew that silence was the deadliest weapon of all. The warship did not need to move, it only needed to wait. Because the aliens had already destroyed themselves the moment they dared to scan. The science officer turned pale, his voice shaking. "Commander, it is not fighting us because it does not need to." The commander stared at him. "Explain." The officer's lips trembled. "We are trapped inside a maze made of false data, and we cannot leave. No matter what we try, we are already caught." The commander closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the cold grip of helplessness. His crew watched him, their leader, their strength, but even he could not break chains that were unseen. The warship's trap was not steel, not fire but knowledge, and knowledge once poisoned could never be undone. The silence grew longer. Some officers whispered prayers, others sat frozen. The young officer finally broke the silence. "Commander, what do we do now?" The commander opened his eyes, his voice low, heavy with despair. "We wait," he said, "for the trap is already closed." The crew lowered their heads. They did not speak again. Their ship floated weak and powerless, locked inside the invisible cage built by human hands, and the warship, quiet as the grave, remained before them. The trap complete, the prey caught, the predator waiting for the next move. The alien ship drifted helplessly, its crew silent, its systems weak. No weapon had struck them, no enemy had boarded them, yet they felt broken. Trapped inside the quiet shadow of the human warship, the crew whispered to each other, asking questions their commander could not answer. Why did humans build such ships? Why did they make them into traps? Why were they so different from every other race in the galaxy? The science officer's hand shook as he searched through the ship's memory banks. Among the chaos of human code, he pulled fragments of old data, legends, records, warnings, all hidden inside the Empire's libraries. He turned to the commander, his voice heavy. "You need to hear this. All of you need to hear this." The control room grew quiet. "Every officer listening," the science officer began. "Long ago, before our time, before our empire rose to power, there were others." His eyes were dark. Great empires ruled the stars, older, stronger. Their fleets stretched across galaxies. The crew leaned closer, fear and curiosity mixing in their eyes. And then they met humans. The officer touched the console, and an old recording flickered to life. A voice spoke, old and cracked, the voice of an alien from centuries past. "Do not scan the humans, do not seek their secrets, for their ships are not ships, they are warnings." The crew shifted uneasily, the words sounding like the very silence outside their own hull. The officer continued. "Our records say that the Carthan Empire, a power greater than ours, once believed human ships were weak. They laughed at the silence of their warships. They mocked their small designs. And so they sent fleets larger than worlds, to study, to test, to scan." The commander frowned. "What happened to them?" The officer lowered his eyes. "They vanished," the crew gasped. The officer nodded slowly. "Every ship, every soldier gone. Their signals lost in the void, no wreckage, no survivors. They say the last message was only 3 words. We see you." The same words that had already appeared on their own screens. The control room grew colder, the silence heavier, as if the warship itself remembered the story and smiled in the dark. Another officer whispered, "So the warnings were real all along." The science officer nodded. "Yes, and there is more." He pressed another key, and new images filled the screen. Drawings, reports, testimonies, all collected from broken survivors of other races. Some ships returned, but not whole, he explained. Their crews were changed, their minds lost, their ships turned against them. The images showed vessels firing on their own fleets, officers speaking in human voices though they were not human. The crew shivered as they watched. The commander clenched his fists, his pride wounded. "All this, and yet we never listened," he muttered. The science officer looked at him. "Because no one wanted to believe it. Commander, it was easier to call it legend, easier to call it fear. But the humans wanted it that way. They wanted the galaxy to forget. So when prideful fleets scanned them again, the trap would spring fresh," the youngest officer whispered. "Why would humans build such terrible things? Why make ships that punish anyone who even looks at them?" The science officer turned to him, his face tired. "Because humans never had the numbers, they never had the size. Their fleets were small, their worlds fewer, but their will was iron. To survive, they turned every weakness into strength, every ship into a shadow, every shadow into a weapon." The crew listened in silence, their fear now mixed with awe. The commander spoke again, his voice low. "So this warship is not just a machine. It is history itself, a piece of their war. Drifting is a warning," the officer nodded. "Yes, every human warship carries the same trap, the same curse built into its core." He lowered his voice further. "It is said the humans do not even need to fire their weapons anymore. The enemy destroys itself before the first shot." The crew sat frozen. Some whispered that perhaps humans were not just another race. Perhaps they were something greater, something older, something meant to be feared forever. The commander shook his head, refusing to believe. But his heart knew the truth. The history was clear, the legends were real, and now they were part of that same history, trapped like the empires before them. The science officer's voice softened, almost like a prayer. They do not fight wars as we do. Commander, they fight with fear, with silence, with knowledge, and it works because here we are. Warriors of a proud empire, broken without a single shot fired. The commander turned to the screen, staring at the dark human warship drifting quietly. He whispered to himself, "You are not a ship. You are a graveyard." The crew lowered their heads, afraid to even look at it too long. The silence stretched, deeper, colder, endless, as if the warship itself was waiting for them to remember the final lesson of history. And the commander finally understood. The trap was not just the scan, not just the code, the real trap was pride. The galaxy had always known, but every empire thought itself too clever, too strong. Every empire wanted to test the silence, and every empire fell. Now his own crew had joined that long list, and the human warship floated quietly, patient, eternal, carrying its history through the stars. The alien ship drifted like a broken leaf in the endless dark. Around them, stars burned far away, silent and uncaring, and before them the human warship remained still, cold and black. It did not move, it did not fire, it did not even glow with life. Yet its presence pressed on the alien crew like a mountain of iron. The commander sat in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. His crew watched him with wide eyes, waiting for orders, waiting for hope. But his heart was heavy, because he too felt the truth. The warship did not need to move, it did not need to speak. Its silence was the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. The science officer broke the stillness, his voice low. "Commander, look at the readings." On the screen, strange signals crawled across their systems, faint but steady. The human ship was not sending power. It was not using weapons, it was simply watching. Every sensor, every system told them the same truth. The human warship saw them, knew them, and could crush them if it wished. The youngest officer whispered, "It waits for us." The crew turned to him uneasy, because his words carried the taste of fear. The commander frowned. "What do you mean?" The young officer swallowed hard. "It does not kill us because it wants to see what we will do. It waits for us to make the next mistake." The words cut through the room like a blade. The silence that followed was colder than space itself. The science officer leaned closer to his console. "Our systems are failing piece by piece, but slowly, almost gently." The commander turned sharply. "Gently?" The officer nodded. "Yes, Commander. It is not destroying us all at once, it is peeling us apart little by little, like a predator that enjoys the chase before the kill." The crew shuddered at the image. Predators, they understood. War, they understood, but this was different. This was patience as a weapon. Suddenly the lights dimmed again. Every screen turned black. Then words appeared, not in their language, but in human tongue. "We see you." The same message from the old legends. The crew froze, their voices caught in their throats. The youngest officer whispered, "It speaks again." The commander stood slowly, his face pale but his voice steady. "Do not answer it." The science officer nodded quickly. "If we respond, it will know we understand. It will take us further." The crew obeyed, their hands frozen above the consoles. No one dared to type, no one dared to speak to the ship. But the words glowed on the screen like fire, unblinking, endless, watching them, judging them. One officer shouted suddenly, "Engines offline again." "No control," another cried, "Weapons frozen." The commander clenched his fists. Every system they had was failing without a fight. The human ship had taken everything from them without lifting a finger, and still it fired no weapon. The silent threat was stronger than any cannon, because it showed them how weak they truly were. The science officer's voice shook. "Commander, I think it wants us to understand. It wants us to remember the history." The commander turned on him. "Why would they let us live? Why not destroy us now?" The officer swallowed. "Because this is their power. Commander, fear is their weapon. Memory is their shield. By letting us live, they spread the warning again, through us." The commander stared at the dark warship on the screen. It drifted without sound, but its silence roared louder than thunder. The crew sat frozen, knowing their ship was no longer theirs. Every breath they took felt borrowed, given only because the human ship allowed it. It was mercy, but mercy that tasted like poison. The youngest officer broke the silence once more. Commander, if it can see us, if it can control us, then maybe it knows our thoughts. The crew gasped, their eyes wide. The commander growled, "Do not speak such nonsense," but even he wondered. Was the warship only watching their systems, or was it reaching deeper into their minds, their fears, their very souls? Another officer whispered, "It does not need to fire. It does not need to chase, it has already won. Because now we will never forget." The words echoed in the commander's mind. Never forget. That was the true weapon. The humans had built warships that planted fear deep inside enemies, fear that would last forever, carried from one survivor to the next. The ship trembled again, a small shake on the main screen. The warship moved just slightly, turning its dark hull toward them. The crew gasped, their hands gripping their seats. The commander raised his voice. "Hold steady. Do not panic," but his own voice trembled, because the movement was enough to remind them that silence did not mean weakness. Silence meant control, silence meant choice, and the warship had just chosen to look at them. The science officer whispered, "It is warning us again, it wants us to run. But only if we understand what we have seen." The commander shook his head. "Or it wants us to spread its legend, to carry the fear to others." The crew looked at him with wide eyes. Because they all knew the truth, the human warship did not need to fight wars anymore. The galaxy fought itself. All the humans had to do was wait, and watch, and let fear do the work. The control room fell into silence again. Only the quiet hum of dying systems remained. The commander stood tall, though his heart felt heavy. He spoke softly. "This is not a ship, this is a warning carved into steel, and we have read it." The crew lowered their heads, none dared to speak, because they knew the warship was still listening, still deciding, and until it moved again, they would remain frozen in its silent shadow. The alien crew sat frozen in their seats. The human warship floated before them, silent, dark, and endless. Its black hull looked dead, yet its presence was alive. The aliens knew they were trapped. Their ship no longer obeyed their commands. Engines were silent, weapons useless, shields broken, and still, no shot had been fired. The commander's hands shook as he gripped the armrests of his chair. He had fought many battles, but this was different. This was not war. This was a cage built from silence, fear, and the unseen power of human design. The science officer's voice cracked through the quiet. "Commander, if we remain still, we die. If we move, we die. But we must choose." The crew turned to their leader, their eyes wide, waiting for hope. The commander stared at the black ship on the screen. He whispered to himself, "Escape or doom. Those are our only paths," one young officer shouted. "Commander, I can try to reroute the engines, but it may trigger another response," another officer added. "If we shut down all power, maybe it will lose interest. Maybe it will leave us." The crew argued in fear, voices clashing, ideas desperate, but all their plans felt like whispers against a storm. The commander raised his hand and silence fell again. He spoke firmly, though his voice trembled. "We will try to escape. We will show them that we are not broken yet." The science officer shook his head. "Commander, if we try, it will know. It will tighten the trap." The commander met his gaze. "Then let it tighten, but I will not sit and wait to die." The crew obeyed, though terror filled their faces. The young officer worked quickly, hands moving over the console. Sparks flew as systems resisted. Lights blinked and died. But slowly a hum returned, faint but real. The engines shivered like a heart struggling to beat again. For a moment, hope lit the room. The commander straightened in his chair, his voice strong. "Prepare to break free. Course away from the human vessel." The crew cheered softly, desperate for any chance, but then the main screen flickered, and new words appeared in human language, glowing bright and cold. "We gave you mercy. Do not waste it." The crew fell silent, their blood turning to ice. The engine screamed as if under invisible hands, then shut down completely. The ship trembled, its lights dimmed. Gravity flickered on and off. The crew cried out, some falling from their seats, others clinging to their stations. It was not just resistance, it was punishment. The science officer whispered, "It warned us, and we disobeyed." The commander slammed his fist against the chair. "No, I will not bow to silence," he shouted. "Try again. Bring engines online. Everything we have." The crew hesitated, fear holding them still. But his voice broke through their despair, and they obeyed. Systems groaned, consoles sparked, alarms blared. The ship pushed against the invisible grip of the human vessel. It shuddered, engines flaring weakly. For one heartbeat, the alien vessel moved. It slid an inch through the void, away from the human shadow, and then everything died. The ship went dark, every system silenced. Only the main screen glowed, showing the black hull of the human warship. Closer than before, it had not fired, it had not moved, and yet it had crushed their attempt like an insect underfoot. The crew sat in darkness, their hearts pounding, their breaths sharp with terror. The youngest officer whispered, "We cannot escape. It will not allow it." The science officer lowered his head. "The trap is perfect, Commander. There is no way out." The commander's eyes burned with fury, but deep inside despair grew heavy. He had wanted to prove that fear could be beaten, but now his crew was broken. And then on the main screen another message appeared. "Power down! Surrender!" The crew gasped. Their voices shaking, the commander stood, his hands clenched into fists. He looked at his officers, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. He knew what they wanted, what they begged for in silence: surrender, because survival was all that remained. But his pride fought back. He had sworn never to bow, never to kneel before any enemy, and yet here he stood, powerless before a ship that had not even fired, a ship that fought with silence and patience. His pride told him to resist, but his duty told him to save his crew. The science officer stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "Commander, if we surrender, maybe it will let us live, maybe it will release us, maybe it only wants us to remember." The crew's eyes filled with desperate hope. The commander closed his eyes, his heart heavy. He whispered, "Very well, cut all power. Surrender." The ship fell into silence, every light extinguished, every system shut down. The crew sat in darkness, listening to their own breathing, and the human warship remained before them, watching, waiting, but it did not strike. It did not crush them. Instead, it drifted slowly past them. Like a shadow moving on, the crew exhaled as one. Relief mixing with dread, the commander opened his eyes, staring at the black ship disappearing into the stars. He whispered, "We live, but we live with fear." The science officer nodded. "Yes, Commander, and now we will carry their warning." As they wished, the alien crew sat in silence. Their ship powerless, they had escaped doom, but only because the humans allowed it. Their survival was not victory, it was mercy, and mercy from humans was more frightening than death. The alien ship drifted in silence, its systems dead, its crew shaken. The human warship had passed them by, moving like a shadow into the endless dark. It had not fired, it had not spoken again. Yet the aliens knew they had been judged. They were alive only because the humans had allowed it. The commander sat in the control chair, staring at the blank screen. His hands trembled, not from anger, but from the weight of what had happened. His crew watched him quietly, none daring to speak first. The science officer finally broke the silence, his voice low and tired. "We have seen the truth, Commander, and now we understand why even the bravest fear them." The crew listened, their faces pale in the dim light of emergency power. The officer continued, "It was never about weapons, never about size. It was about fear, it was about memory, it was about control. They do not need to fight battles. They let others destroy themselves with pride." The youngest officer whispered, "And now it is our turn. We are the ones who will carry the story." The commander closed his eyes. He remembered the old warnings, the stories told in whispers, the legends mocked by proud voices. Now he knew those were not legends, they were history. Every empire that ignored the warnings had fallen into the same trap. And now his ship had joined that long line of fools. The crew sat in silence as the science officer recorded the final log. His words were slow, heavy, filled with dread. "To all who hear this, remember the lesson. Remember the silence, never scan a human warship. Never seek their secrets. Never think their stillness is weakness. Because their silence is not empty, it is alive. And it is watching." The commander listened as the words were sealed into the ship's memory banks. He felt the weight of the warning pressing on his chest. He whispered, "This is our duty now, not to fight, not to win, but to warn." The crew lowered their heads, some in shame, some in relief, some in quiet terror. Hours passed. The human ship vanished into the distance, but the fear remained, even in silence, even in safety. The crew felt its eyes still upon them, every sound of their own breath. Every flicker of light felt like a reminder. The warship did not need to be near, because the memory of it was enough to haunt them. The youngest officer asked softly, "Commander, do you think it will come back?" The commander did not answer at first. His eyes still on the stars, finally he said, "No. It will not return, it does not need to, because it already owns us." The words struck the crew like thunder. They understood the humans had planted fear inside them, and that fear would never die. The science officer spoke again. "Perhaps that is their greatest weapon, not the trap, not the silence, but the fear that spreads afterward." The commander nodded slowly. "Yes, they do not need to destroy us, because we will destroy ourselves if we forget the warning." The crew sat together. Broken but alive, they knew that when they returned home, their story would spread across the Empire, and the warning would spread again, stronger, clearer, heavier than before. Every soldier, every officer, every child would learn the same rule. Never scan a human warship. The youngest officer trembled. But will they believe us? Will they listen this time? The commander's eyes burned with hard truth. No, not all will listen. Some will laugh. Some will say it is just fear, just a ghost story. And one day others will try again, because pride always blinds the strong. The crew lowered their heads, knowing he was right. The silence inside the ship was broken only by the faint hum of emergency power. No one moved. No one spoke loudly. It was as if even the walls of their vessel still carried the human shadow. The commander stood at last, his voice cold and steady. "This log will be our last act. Let it be heard across every star. Let it be the final warning." The science officer sealed the message, his hands trembling. The words glowed on the screen before disappearing into the archives, and in that moment the crew felt as though the human warship itself had approved. The lights flickered softly, and then the silence grew deep again. The commander looked at his crew, broken but alive. He whispered, "We live today, but tomorrow, others will test them again." He raised his head toward the stars, his voice like iron, "And when they do, the humans will remind them." Just as they reminded us, the alien ship drifted slowly. Powerless but alive and far away, the human warship moved into the dark, unseen, unheard, untouchable. It carried no banners, no songs, no cries of victory. It needed none, for its silence was the loudest warning in the galaxy, and every race that heard the warning would fear it forever.